In the raw, dust-laden wind of a Wyoming October, two young sisters stood trembling on a crude auction platform. Their bare feet pressed against splintered wood as they clutched each other, watching a weathered cattleman separate himself from the indifferent crowd. He hadn't come for labor. When he drew a heavy leather pouch from his coat and began laying gold coins one by one across the planks, his scarred hands shook, not from frontier greed, but from something far heavier. The sudden weight of a man attempting to purchase what time had already stolen from him. There are silent moments on the frontier that split a man's life clean in two. Wyoming Territory in the autumn of 1873 was a dominion that ground down everything it touched. Cold breath rolled off the mountains uninvited, settling deep into marrow and bone. Grass fields stretched endlessly in every direction, vast and rolling, a golden ocean frozen mid-swell. The sky overhead hung so impossibly wide that a lone man beneath it felt himself shrinking. Reduced to nothing more than a heartbeat wrapped in cracked leather and persistent dust. This land held no regard for human ambition. It carried its own deep purposes. The quiet empire of snow, distances so vast that loneliness became a permanent companion. A man stopped trying to outrun it. He set a place for it at his evening table instead. Silas Kane understood this terrain in his blood. 35 years old, forged entirely by the frontier. His broad frame and lined face had been shaped not by hardship that shattered, but by endurance that stripped away everything unnecessary. The way relentless wind carves stone down to what is essential and what will last. His face told his history without a single word spoken. A close-trimmed dark beard stood against the persistent cold. Deep lines around his eyes testified to years spent squinting toward horizons most men never glimpsed. His jaw, firm, unyielding, might have been cut from the same granite forming the western ranges. His deep brown eyes carried contradiction. Quiet warmth buried beneath a practiced distance he wore like armor. He was a cattleman. His modest ranch sat nestled in the foothills, where good grazing land met a creek that ran year-round. Where the savage winds of the open plains lost their teeth before arriving. 40 head of cattle comprised his holdings. A cabin he'd built with his own hands, timber-felled, seasoned, and joined with the deliberate patience of a man who knew that anything worth having demanded time freely given. He lived alone, had always lived alone, not by preference, but by some quiet verdict the territory itself had handed down. A natural selection favoring men who could bear their own company without breaking beneath the silence. His parents, both taken by a swift fever in the same week. He was 14. After that, he navigated his remaining youth without witness or guide. 21 years his only loyalties had been the land, his livestock, and that faint inner voice whispering the difference between surviving and living. He'd ignored it consistently. To heed it meant confronting a need he'd buried long ago, the fundamental hunger for family, that hollow space carved open beside two fresh graves at 14 years old, with no one left to explain what came next. On the second Tuesday of October, he rode into Red Bluff for winter provisions: salt, flour, coffee, ammunition for the rifle he used protecting his herd from predators, the plain ingredients of an unadorned existence. Red Bluff itself barely qualified as a town. A general store, a saloon, a livery stable, and a thin scattering of buildings arranged across the landscape without deliberation, as though placement had been nobody's concern. The kind of town that existed only because two trails happened to cross. A place where travelers paused, watered their horses, and moved on toward wherever they were actually going. So when a crowd gathered near the general store, it meant something. Red Bluff didn't draw crowds. Red Bluff barely drew conversation. But on this day, close to 30 people stood facing the wooden platform normally reserved for loading freight wagons. Today, it served an altogether different purpose. Silas hitched his horse and drifted closer, not from curiosity, but because the bodies between him and the store entrance blocked his way to the supplies he needed. That was when he saw them. Two girls standing on those weathered planks, exposed to an October wind that cut without mercy. The older one looked about 13, the younger maybe 7. Their dresses had been washed past saving, faded, threadbare, useless against the cold. No shoes, bare feet on rough wood, hair matted and unwashed, framing faces streaked with the particular kind of filth that settles when nobody cares enough to wash it away. They clung to each other. The elder girl's arm locked around her sister, not tenderness, but fortification, wall and shelter, mother and soldier. She had assumed every role the adults in her life had abandoned, absorbed those duties without being asked, because a 13-year-old had no choice when the grown world collapsed around her. The younger one pressed into her sister's ribs the way small animals burrow against something larger when the storm turns savage. She gripped a cloth doll so worn its features had faded to ghosts, a mouth that might have been stitched there once, eyes reduced to memory. Her own eyes were enormous, glassy with tears she hadn't yet released. The look of a child watching the world rearrange itself into something unrecognizable, with no one offering a reason why. Behind them stood a man, gaunt, hard-featured, the kind of face that years of hard drinking had whittled into something permanently scheming, narrow eyes that never stopped calculating, stained vest, hat shoved back on his skull, the expression of a peddler ready to unload stock that moved too slow. This was their uncle, their dead father's brother, the man who'd inherited them 6 months back when fever took both parents in the same week. He had learned quickly that 2 orphan nieces were not an inheritance but a weight, and on the frontier, weight interfered with whiskey and cards. He was selling them, though no one used that word. The frontier had softer language for this transaction, placing them, arranging suitable homes, apprenticing them to families willing to provide what he could not, would not. The vocabulary was civilized. What it described was not. The crowd shifted with visible unease. Some men studied their boots. Others covered their mouths with calloused hands. A few watched with the flat resignation of people who had seen children redistributed by hardship before. People who had learned that speaking up cost something and silence cost nothing. Silas stood at the edge of the gathering and felt something crack open in his chest. A sealed place, untouched for 21 years. It did not open slowly. It did not ease apart. It shattered, the way river ice breaks in March, sudden and irreversible. A sound no one else could hear, but it changed the temperature of everything inside him. He looked at the older girl. In her eyes, he recognized himself at 14, standing over fresh-turned earth. That specific look. A child shoved across the border into adulthood without warning or permission. Responsibility settling onto shoulders far too narrow for its mass, yet shoulders that would carry it regardless, because the only alternative meant releasing the last thread connecting him to everything he'd lost. Then he looked at the younger one. In her smallness, her open defenselessness, he recognized something he had never once held. A reason for his own strength to exist beyond keeping himself alive. The uncle kept talking. He described the girls like livestock. The older one could cook. The younger could manage household tasks. His tone carried the flat precision of a man selling equipment at market. Function, durability, output. Not a word about what they actually were. 2 orphaned children pressed together against a bitter wind on raw wooden planks, while grown men around them weighed labor against cost and muttered about the wisdom of the purchase. One rancher in the crowd called out a bid. He wanted the elder girl only. Needed help in his kitchen, he said. The little one was too small to be worth feeding. Clara's arms locked around her sister with a force visible from 30 feet away. Her dark eyes found the rancher's face and held there. What burned behind them had no right to live inside a 13-year-old. It was refusal, absolute, savage, total. The refusal of a creature backed into its last corner, prepared to draw blood from anyone who reached for what she held. Lily began to cry, quietly, a muffled, careful sound, the kind of weeping children learn when loud sobs have brought punishment instead of comfort. Those small cries, pressed into her sister's ribs, swallowed by fabric too thin to warm anything, yet trying all the same. Silas felt the crack inside his chest split wider. It became a door, and through that door poured 21 years of silence, of solitude carried without complaint, of that quiet voice he had been refusing to hear since he was 14. He stepped forward. The crowd parted without being asked. No one pushed. No one was shoved. Men simply moved aside, an instinctive yielding, inevitable as water breaking around stone. He stood before the platform, looked up at the uncle. His dark eyes, normally still, normally calm, held something different now. A controlled fury, banked low, restrained by one thought only. Its release would require actions unfit for two children to witness. Silas spoke a single word. His voice came out deep and rough, scraped raw from years of disuse, like hinges groaning on a door sealed shut by rust. The uncle studied him, named a price designed to end the conversation. Silas reached inside his coat and drew out a leather pouch. One by one, with slow deliberate hands, he counted gold coins onto the platform boards. The movements of a man who understood completely that what he was reaching for could never be purchased with metal. This was formality, nothing more. The real transaction was happening somewhere between his chest and those two pairs of frightened eyes locked on his fingers. The uncle swept up the gold and walked away. No backward glance, no parting word, no gesture. Not farewell, not regret, not even the barest human acknowledgement that he was leaving two children with a man he had never met. He simply pocketed his payment and disappeared into the saloon. Quick and total as water swallowed by desert sand, no trace left behind. Silas stood beneath the platform, looking up at the sisters. Clara stared down at him with hard, suspicious defiance. The armor of someone who had already learned that rescue and danger often arrived wearing the same face. Her arm stayed clamped around Lily. Her jaw was set like iron. Those dark eyes conducted an appraisal more thorough than anything the frontier had ever leveled at him. The younger girl peered out from behind her sister's body. Hazel eyes, still wet, found his dark ones. She studied him with the terrible openness of a child who had not yet learned to protect herself from hope. Silas raised his hands toward the platform, palm up, fingers open. An offering. The same slow, unpushing gesture he used with horses that had been beaten. Not reaching, not taking, presenting. Underscore underscore, quote underscore 0 underscore underscore, he said, and the words carried weight like stones dropped into still water. Underscore underscore, quote underscore 1 underscore underscore. The elder girl studied his open hand, then his face. She searched for what she'd learned to expect from adults who collected children. The arithmetic behind the eyes, the quiet appraisal of usefulness, the calculation of what could be wrung from small bodies. She found none of it. What she found instead was something so foreign it took her a moment to name, so long had it been absent from her world. 6 months without it. Kindness. Real and unrehearsed and undemanded. The kindness of a man who wasn't shopping for labor, wasn't purchasing a service. A man standing on a platform in the October wind with his hand held out and his chest cracked open after 21 years alone, offering himself as shelter to two children who had none. The younger girl moved first. She let go of her sister's dress and stepped forward, bare feet meeting rough wood. Her small, dirt-blackened hand slipped into his enormous calloused palm. Those tiny fingers vanished inside his grip. Like a seed pressing into turned earth, no hesitation, no question. The instinct of something small recognizing something safe. Silas felt her hand. 5 fingers, the weight of a sparrow, the gravity of a collapsing world. The elder girl watched her sister's hand resting inside the stranger's. She looked for flinching, for tightening, for the possessive signals she'd memorized from her uncle's grip. Nothing. Only gentleness. The careful, deliberate gentleness of a man whose hands could split stone, choosing instead to hold something precious the way water holds a fallen leaf, resting on the surface, never pulling it under. Then the elder girl stepped forward. She didn't take his hand. She laid her own on top of her sister's, already cradled in his palm. 3 hands stacked on a rough-cut platform in a town that barely held a name. A family, forming in the space between one breath and the next. He lifted them down one at a time, slow and careful, the deliberation of a man who means to carry what he's chosen for the rest of his days. They rode north, toward the foothills. The elder girl sat behind him on the horse. The younger rode in front, tucked between his arms and the saddle horn. She was asleep before they crested the first rise. Her head settled against his chest. Her small body rose and fell with his breathing. Her threadbare cloth doll hung loose from fingers gone slack with trust. The elder girl stayed awake, eyes on the trail, on his hands working the reins, on the country opening wide before them. She wasn't ready to lower her guard, but something in her vigilance was shifting. She was no longer watching against him. She was beginning to watch alongside him, a second wall joining the first, forming a corner, making shelter, starting the bones of a room. The cabin was more than they'd expected. Warm, solid, built with the patient care of a man who understood a home isn't just timber and stone. It's a promise, given physical form. The empty room, he told them, had a window facing east. First light would find them there every morning. He hadn't furnished it, hadn't known what 2 young sisters might need. He learned. He built 2 beds from pine, sanding the wood until it felt closer to a touch than a surface. He stitched mattresses from canvas and stuffed them with clean straw. He traded a calf for fabric so the elder girl could sew curtains for that east-facing window. He taught himself to cook beyond meat and black coffee. He learned to braid hair, practiced on lengths of rope until his thick fingers found the patience required for smaller heads. He soaked in the rhythms of childhood, a cadence absent from his own growing up. He filled the gaps in bedtime stories with scraps of memory. When memory ran dry, he improvised. The elder girl's name was Clara. She gave it to him on the 3rd day, offered it the way someone cracks a door 1 inch, testing whether the air beyond might bite. The younger girl's name was Lily. She surrendered hers on day 1, because 7-year-olds have not yet learned to ration trust. She told him everything. The doll her mother had sewn by hand, the creek behind their old home, her favorite constellations, songs she still remembered, the exact way her father used to hoist her onto his shoulders. Silas absorbed every word, cataloging each detail the way he stored provisions for winter, guarding them against the cold, against any future need to summon warmth into a room no weather could reach. For weeks, Clara watched him, measuring, testing, waiting for the cruelty she had learned to expect from adults who acquired children. She braced for raised voices, rough hands, the moment his kindness would shed its mask and the real transaction would begin. That moment never came. What came instead was consistency, the most radical gift the frontier could offer. Day after day, the same quiet, steady care. Coffee brewed before dawn, breakfast made without being asked, the cabin warm when they woke, stones cleared from the creek path so bare feet could pass safely. The morning Clara called him by name, Silas, was the morning the last wall fell. Not father, not papa. Just Silas, spoken across the breakfast table with the unguarded ease of someone who had stopped measuring distance and simply begun to live where distance once stood. He glanced up from his coffee. Dark eyes met dark eyes. In the space between them, 21 years of his solitude and 6 months of her vigilance dissolved into something neither had known before. Family. not forged by blood, but by choice, by the deliberate daily decision to belong to one another. The frontier carried their story for years. The cowboy who bought two sisters at auction in Red Bluff, who brought them to a cabin in the foothills, who built them beds from pine, who learned to braid hair with hands trained to shoe horses and bend iron. They said Clara grew tall and fierce, became a teacher in the valley, devoted to children overlooked by those meant to protect them. They said Lily kept the cloth doll her whole life, set it on a shelf in every home she ever lived in. A silent witness to how certain precious things endure. They said Silas never sold a single head from his herd during the brutal winter of 1879. Selling would have meant shrinking his ability to provide, and providing had become the only language he spoke with any fluency. Some promises are sworn in churches or courtrooms. Others are whispered in private moments between two people choosing each other. But the deepest promises, the ones that burn longest, are made on auction platforms in biting October wind, by men who count gold coins with steady hands while their hearts pledge something no sum could ever cover. Silas spoke one word, the most costly utterance Silas Kane ever made, worth more than any purchase before or after, worth more than all the gold in the territory, not for what it bought, but for what it built. The cabin still stands in those foothills, where the creek bends south. The east-facing window still catches first light. And if you stand in the room where two pine beds once held two sisters, who arrived barefoot and afraid, who left strong and loved, the warmth lingers still. Warmth built by a man's hands once his heart finally revealed their true purpose. Not survival, family. Like the video and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West.